So here we have the pattern for the cuff latch, and we have the lining and the face fabric cut. The lining I cut on the bias, and the face fabric I actually cut on the cross grain so that the texture would match with the texture of the sleeves on the coat. So this is the pattern. These are the pieces. Now, let's get busy. Since we cut both pieces out of the same pattern piece, we want to actually shave 1/8 of an inch off of each edge on the lining so that the seams will favor to the inside. So what that looks like here is you just shave that much off, not a lot, and do try to work with a sharp rotary cutter. So 1/8 of an inch off each edge should be just fine. So next, we want to pin these two right sides together. You can see that I've pinned one side first, and I like pin basting rather than pinning perpendicular. I find you get more control. So the easy way to get these two edges to match is just to fold this over, and you can see when you fold it over, the edges automatically match. So again, pin based all along. So there we are. And then we can come back here and match that corner. And then you're just going to ease the face fabric slightly onto the lining. When you're favoring, that is what you do. I like having the lining, which is going to be the smaller of the pieces, together. I like the lining pinned on the top, because that way the feed dogs on the machine will do the work. Now, before I go over to the machine, what I have done, since we're using 1/2 inch seam allowances, I marked there. I want to know that intersection, because there's a little trick I'm going to show you when we get over to the machine so that we can actually turn that corner and pull it tightly when we turn it right side out. Now, this is a little trick that I use to turn my corners. I'm using white thread because it's a little easier to see, but normally I would use something that matches. This is buttonhole thread, or Mara 30. And so what I want to do here is I want to make a little tiny loop right at that corner. And so when I pull the stitch, what I will eventually do then is thread this into the needle. So you have both ends of the thread going through the needle. So it's going to create a loop. It's especially challenging when you're doing it through a camera. Okay, so here we have the thread, and on the back you just see a little tiny stitch. And like I said, if it were in the same color as what you're sewing on, you really wouldn't notice it. So then I like to come in here and bury that right there, and you tunnel it between the layers and have it emerge somewhere out here. So this then that point there, it kind of ties that off so that when we sew, and I'm going to show this running through the machine. We will sew right up to there with short stitches, one across, and then sew back this way. When we turn it right side out, we'll use this to pull this corner tight. So now, let's put this under the machine and sew. Seam allowances are 1/2 inch. Stitch length is your standard 2.5. And as we work up to the corner here, I like to shorten the stitch to 0.5 to 0.75. You want a very short stitch as you're going around these corners. Let's see. Yep. Oh, there we are. Good. Okay. And then lengthen it again. I generally shorten and lengthen about 1/4 of an inch from where we turn. Okay, so now this is where, so you can get a better look at this. So this stitch length is 0.5, 0.75. So we stitch up to the corner here, turn, stitch one, let's see, one, yeah. I should give it 2. And then stitch for about 1/4 of an inch or so, and then lengthen the stitch back to your standard 2.5. Now, one of the things I'm going to show you, as we're sewing the second side, see how I fold that? That's going to, it'll sort of reinforce the favoring. Okay, let me show you the result. Extremely short stitches there and here. An extremely short stitch at these corners makes it so that you can trim close and you can turn it, and you don't have to worry so much about the fabric bursting at the corners. Next, the pressing table. Before we trim, it's a good idea to press everything as sewn. And this may seem counterintuitive, but since I want to press these seam allowances open, it really is easier to press the seam allowances open before you trim these corners. So what that's going to look like, this is where you want your point presser. And you have to press this in sections. So there we are. See, it is easier to manage when you have an entire seam allowance. And you just open it up and press it a little at a time. And we turn it over, press the other side. And you can see here, far easier to press it open before you trim all those seam allowances. Okay, so we have now both seam allowances pressed. Put that out of the way. This is where we trim. So here, so you can get within about 1 millimeter of that stitching. And see, this is where some people get a little shy, but that's why you have short stitches there, so you can trim quite close in there. And so then again, start a steep angle here and a steep angle here. But you want to remove as much bulk as you can get out of there. So there you have, get a little extra trim there. There. There's one. Now let me trim the other. This doesn't, you don't have to trim quite so much because it's a flat angle. And I'm going to trim that there. So next, I will turn this right side out. When you're starting to turn this right side out, this point, you just want to start it with the point turner just to get it going. And then you can use the heel end of the point turner to push everything through. And what I'd say is don't let it bunch up too much here. It might mar your fabric. So once you can get a hold of it here, then you can turn it right side out. So now, this angle here, I'm just going to slip the point turner back in and just make that a nice point. And then here, before you use your thread, you want to turn it as much as you can before you rely on the thread. But then this is where, okay, sorry about that. This is where the thread comes in. You can see here it is. Now, what you're just going to do is gently, gently give it a pull. And it may break, it may not, but there you have it. A nice, crisp edge. Let me give this a press, and I'll show you the results. I like to press it from the back, and now you can see how the seams are favoring towards the lining. Now notice that little corner here. Not as crisp as I would like, so I'm going to show you another little trick for making it press more crisply. Again, with your buttonhole thread, you use this, then I'm going to press this without the pressing claw so you can see what I'm doing here. So take both ends and you pull and there you go. I might even do it on this one too, just to reinforce that. So, sorry. So there you go. You have nice, crisp corners. Now, let's go back to the work table. And here we have the cuff latches. Now I'm planning on a top stitch, but I'm going to cover the top stitching later, so I will set these aside. We're finished with the cuff latches.